Welcome back to another book highlight. We have now reached chapter 17 in Of Sheaves and Stars, and our friend Joseph is in a steady position in Potiphar's house, and now he's being propositioned with evil. Pleasure twisted out of context always leads to evil. That's something important for us to remember. But the first thing I want to point out is that Joseph has been in a pretty positive time. He's still a slave, but he's experienced a lot of favor and good attention. But it's important that we don't let our guard down in positive times like this. We don't want to live in paranoia, but the Bible tells us to stay alert because the enemy is on the prowl. In Jesus, we're equipped to defeat the enemy, but we need to continually engage with the Holy Spirit, making sure we're building our lives on the firm foundation of God's nature and character, hiding his word in our hearts that we might not sin against him, and embracing his worldview. That's what we're going to talk about today. This is the mark of a true believer, embracing God's way of thinking in every category of life, seeking to serve and honor God in every area of our lives. This is what makes a powerful Christian, allowing God to transform us. Now, Joseph obviously lived before the Holy Spirit had come through Jesus, but we've been talking about how he was living honorably before God. Even through the trial of slavery, Joseph had committed to honor God, and God was honoring him back. God was showing him favor and revealing himself through Joseph to the Egyptians, which is amazing. But we've also discussed how this attention can be a mixed blessing, and it's clear that other eyes were on Joseph during this time, particularly the eyes of Potiphar's wife, whom I call Nefer in this book. What I want to look at today is where Joseph got the nerve to refuse his master's wife. I mean, she was offering him sex. To a degree, she controlled his options, so this might have been his only opportunity for pleasure as a slave, and she could punish him for resisting. This sort of conundrum would cause many people to compromise. Why? Because their morals weren't based on something strong enough. God has promised in 1 Corinthians that he will be faithful and won't allow us to be tempted beyond our ability, but with the temptation, he will provide a way of escape. However, if we're not engaging with him continually, living our lives as servants of his kingdom, we won't see the way of escape through our own desires. One of the lines I really like in this chapter is where Joseph is struggling to hear his father's old admonitions about purity through the raging of his own natural desires wanting to give in, which we all battle with to some degree. And he remembers, I actually know better, but not just because I used to imagine myself better. There's a huge difference between being holy and simply being sheltered. A sheltered person might avoid sin because they're being kept close by strict parents and they don't really know much about the outside world, and they may think that's enough to make them a good person. But as soon as real temptation arises, they'll fall away because they weren't prepared. They don't have their roots in God himself. They just have their roots in their parents' ideas of morality and maybe fear of punishment. Our roots have to go deep into God, and our morality should be based on his worldview, not on a set of external rules to keep us in line. Our lives should be lived from a place of delight in our Father and belief that his ways are the best and lead to life, and that he's the rewarder of those who seek him. Joseph was cut off from his family and his culture, but that wasn't what drove his morality. He had learned in the midst of his crisis in Egypt to make his relationship with God personal, and his morality was strong because it was based on God himself. Joseph knew God had been sustaining him all this time, and he didn't want to jeopardize their relationship with anything that wasn't sanctioned by God. Desires fulfilled outside of God's plan are tainted, no matter how beautiful they seem to be. Joseph, with his decision to refuse Potiphar's wife, he was demonstrating honor for her, for Potiphar, and honor for God and his ways. And as difficult as it may have been, he was holding out for God's best. And it's worth it, even when we suffer for it on earth, because the ultimate reward is God himself. I loved writing this part of the story because this is the kind of thing I want to make more accessible to the average person. Joseph was an average person too. He wasn't a superhero. He was just a man holding tightly to the God he loved. In our own temptations, we can and should echo Joseph's prayer in the chapter at the very end, where he says, Lord, I want to honor you, but I've never distrusted my own strength so much. I beg you to lend me yours. And if we're seeking him, he will.